What if the shadow following you wasn't yours? Daniel Harker lived a quiet life until the night his shadow started lagging behind. At first, it was small things, a delayed movement, a twitch out of sync, but then it began pointing toward rooms he hadn't entered and showing him things that weren't there. Soon, Daniel realized the horrifying truth. The darkness beneath him wasn't his reflection at all. It was something else. Something that had been standing behind him his entire life, waiting for the right moment to step forward. In this video, I'll tell you the story of the misplaced shadow, a ghost tale you'll never forget. Let's jumping into story. Daniel Harker never liked mornings. They always felt like borrowed time to him, the fragile hours when the world hadn't fully settled into itself. The sun came slanting through his apartment blinds at strange angles, drawing bars of light across the carpet. The shadows they cast were sharp, heavy things, lying darker than they should. He often told himself it was the fault of his tired eyes. On Tuesday, he noticed it for the first time. He had dropped a pen in his study. Kneeling, he reached beneath the desk, the old wood creaking as he bent down. When he straightened again, pen in hand, he caught sight of something out of place. His shadow, the dull silhouette sprawled across the wall, didn't move with him. For a fraction of a second, it lingered bent over, crouched beneath the desk, even though he was already standing. It snapped back a heartbeat later. A trick of the light, he told himself. Nothing more. Daniel lived alone in a quiet corner of Holloway, a town built on the bones of industry. His apartment was on the second floor of a narrow red brick building above a laundromat. The walls smelled faintly of soap and old plaster. He worked in the archives of the town's library, restoring brittle newspapers and cataloging photographs nobody ever looked at. His days were long stretches of silence, his nights even longer. When he noticed the shadow again, 2 nights later, it was harder to explain away. He was brushing his teeth, the bathroom light buzzing overhead. In the mirror, he saw his own movements, hand to mouth, rhythmic, boring. But on the tile wall to his left, his shadow's arm didn't rise in time. It hung there for a second too long, as if deciding whether it wanted to follow at all. Daniel lowered the toothbrush slowly, watching. His shadow's hand came down a moment later, like a lazy echo. The hair on his arms rose. He spat into the sink, splashed water on his face, and shut the light off. He told himself it was exhaustion again. He'd been staying late at the archives, scanning endless reels of microfilm, squinting at text blurred by age. Anyone would start seeing things. Shadows were only shadows. Still, when he went to bed, he pulled the sheets high around his shoulders. On Friday, the neighbor knocked. Maya lived across the hall, a graduate student in linguistics who always seemed to be rushing somewhere, laptop bag over her shoulder and coffee in hand. Daniel had spoken to her only in passing. "You've been up late a lot, huh?" she said when he opened the door. Her dark hair was tied up, her eyes curious. "I keep hearing your TV at like 2 in the morning. Daniel frowned. "I don't own a TV. Maya blinked, laughed awkwardly, then shrugged. "Weird, must be from somewhere else in the building. Sorry, I just thought I'd check." He nodded and closed the door. His apartment was silent, as always. Too silent. He looked down at the carpet. The late afternoon sun was spilling across it. His shadow stretched at his feet, long and thin. It looked like it was leaning a little farther than his body was. He shut the curtains. By the following week, he couldn't ignore it anymore. The shadow had begun. Pointing. It started in the kitchen. Daniel went in for a glass of water, his slippers whispering across the linoleum. As he reached for the cupboard, something tugged at the corner of his vision. He turned and saw it. His shadow's arm extended outward, not upward with his own gesture, but sideways, its finger angled toward the narrow pantry door. He froze. The pantry was empty. It always was, save for some canned beans and dust. But the shadow's hand remained outstretched, trembling faintly on the plaster wall. "Stop," Daniel whispered, and yanked his own hand down. The shadow obeyed, but a beat too late. Sleep came harder. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined the dark shape at his side moving when he didn't, bending over him, crawling along the ceiling. He started leaving the lights on, though that only made things worse. In bright light, the shadow grew sharper, clearer. At work, he caught himself staring at his outline on the floor of the archives, waiting to see if it would twitch. Once, while threading microfilm, He swore he saw the silhouette of his head turn toward him, even though his body was still. His colleagues noticed he looked pale, but Daniel brushed them off. He told himself he would not speak of it. Speaking made things real. It was a Thursday evening when the shadow truly betrayed him. He had been sorting through a box of old photographs at his desk, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the radiator. The blinds were half open, the orange dusk slanting in. He leaned back in his chair, rubbed his eyes, then stretched his arms high above his head. Something flickered against the wall. He turned. His shadow was still sitting in the chair. He froze, arms hanging uselessly above him. The shadow sat hunched, hands folded in its lap, staring straight ahead. For several breaths it did not move at all. Daniel's skin went cold. His chest locked tight. Then, slowly, the shadow raised its head. On the plaster, its featureless face tilted toward him. Daniel lunged forward and yanked the blinds shut, plunging the room into murky darkness. His breath came fast and shallow. When he dared to look again, the shadow was gone, lost in the dim. But he knew it was still there, watching. He hardly slept that night. Every creak of the pipes, every rustle from the street outside made him twitch. Around 3 a.m, he gave up on sleep entirely and sat at his desk, lamp blazing, writing in a notebook. He tried to describe what he'd seen in plain, logical words. Shadow moves out of sync. Shadow sits still when I don't. Possible neurological issue? Vision disorder? Stress hallucination? The words looked foolish, even as he wrote them. But he couldn't stop. He filled 3 pages, scribbling theories, scratching out lines, trying to convince himself there was a rational explanation. Then he looked down at the floor. There was no shadow under his chair. None at all. His pen clattered from his hand. He stood slowly, scanning the room. The lamplight glared bright across the carpet, the walls, the stacks of books. His body should have cast a silhouette, but there was nothing. Until he saw it. In the corner of the room, far from the lamp's reach, a black figure hunched low against the wall, exactly his shape, but crouched like an animal, its head tilted. Daniel staggered back, knocking over his chair. The figure rippled, wavered, and then slid flat across the plaster, snapping back beneath him as though it had never left. He didn't sleep at all after that. Daniel called in sick the next day. He sat by the window, blinds drawn, letting only a thin slit of gray light into the apartment. He hadn't shaved, hadn't eaten. His notebook sat open on the desk beside him, filled with scrawled observations. The entries no longer tried to explain. They only recorded. 7:42 a.m., shadow lingered again, arm late. 9:15 a.m., shadow absent in hallway, reappeared in kitchen. 10:03 a.m., shadow pointing at pantry again. Nothing inside. By evening his handwriting shook with desperation. He closed the book, shoved it in a drawer, and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. He was going mad. He knew it. Shadows didn't move on their own. Shadows didn't hide in corners. It had to be his mind unraveling, some fracture opening in his vision, his perception. And yet, when he glanced at the wall, he swore he saw his shadow's arm raised, finger pointing directly at him. The visions began 3 nights later. Daniel was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. The streetlight outside his window cast a pale orange glow through the blinds. He could see his shadow faintly across the plaster, stretched thin by the angle. At first, it seemed ordinary. His arm rose as he shifted. The shadow's arm followed. His chest rose with a breath, and so did its. Then the bed beneath him grew wet. He bolted upright. His sheets were dry. But on the wall, his shadow lay in a dark pool, spreading outward. The liquid was thick, black, glistening, like oil or blood. It seeped from beneath the shape of his body, dripping down the wall in rivulets. Daniel clamped a hand over his mouth. The smell of iron filled his nose. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, the wall was clean. His shadow lay normal across it, still and quiet. He didn't sleep again that night. The next day at the archives, Daniel tried to lose himself in work. He hunched over microfilm reels, the clatter of the old machine soothing in its monotony. But even there, the shadow followed. On the screen, projected in grainy black and white, he saw his own silhouette behind the frame, looming far too large, as though someone else was sitting directly behind him. He turned. The chair was empty. He stared at the machine until his eyes watered. The air felt close, thick. When he left that evening, the setting sun cast long shapes across the sidewalk. He kept his eyes on his shoes, afraid to look down. Maya caught him in the hallway that night. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, tilting her head. Her voice was light, but her eyes searched his face. Daniel nodded too quickly. "Fine." "You don't look fine." He started to brush past her, but she touched his arm. "Daniel, you've been different. I hear you pacing at night. I swear I saw you standing in your window at 3 a.m., just staring out." Daniel froze. He hadn't stood in the window. He hadn't even gone near it. At least he didn't remember doing so. Maya's brow furrowed. "If you need help, I'm fine," he snapped too harshly. He pulled away, fumbling with his keys, and slipped inside his apartment. He shut the door and leaned against it, chest heaving. From the corner of his eye, he saw the shadow on the wall. It was waving directly toward the hallway. By the weekend, Daniel stopped pretending it wasn't happening. He dragged every lamp he owned into the living room. 3 floor lamps, 2 desk lamps, even the bare bulb from the closet. He turned them all on at once, flooding the space with harsh white light. Then he set up his phone on a stack of books, hit record, and sat in the middle of the brightness. He forced himself to sit still, hands gripping his knees. He watched his shadow carefully. Minutes passed. His outline clung to the carpet, stretched across the walls. For once it seemed obedient. Daniel almost convinced himself it would behave. Then the lamp behind him flickered. For the briefest instant, the room dimmed, and the phone caught it. On the tiny screen, his shadow shifted. Its head turned fully toward him, while his own remained forward. Daniel's stomach dropped. His chest tightened, breath shallow. He lunged for the phone, fumbling to stop the recording. His fingers shook as he replayed the video. There it was, clear. His own shape, swiveling its head unnaturally, staring straight at him. He dropped the phone as if it had burned him. The lamps buzzed loudly in the silence. Sleep deprivation wore him thin. He stopped eating properly. His skin grew pale, his eyes ringed dark. Every surface in his apartment felt infected with the shadow's presence. He saw it twitch in the reflection of the toaster, stretch unnaturally in the glass of the shower door. One night, he thought he saw someone in Maya's window across the hall. A tall, black silhouette stood behind her as she read on her couch. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, it was gone. The next morning, Maya caught him leaving for work. "You really don't look good," she said softly. "Daniel, I mean it. You should talk to someone. You look like you haven't slept in weeks." He opened his mouth to argue, but then stopped. Behind her, faintly cast on the hallway wall, her shadow lifted its arm. Slowly, it pointed directly at him. Daniel's throat closed. He staggered back, shaking his head. "Stay away from me," he muttered, her face crumpled in confusion. "Daniel," but he had already turned, rushing down the stairs, heart pounding in his ears. The shadow no longer waited for darkness. In the library stacks, Daniel caught glimpses of it leaning around shelves ahead of him. On the bus, it appeared in the reflections of windows, its head pressed too close to his own. At night, the visions grew more violent. He saw blood soaking his bed again, dripping onto the floor. Once, the shadow leaned over him, and though it had no face, he felt breath hot on his cheek. He woke gagging, convinced something had been inside his mouth. He stopped going to work. The apartment became a fortress of light. Lamps burned day and night. His electricity bill would be ruinous, but he didn't care. He taped blackout curtains over the windows so no stray streetlight could interfere. But the shadow found ways. One evening, while eating cold soup straight from the can, Daniel looked down and saw it crawling across the table, rising onto the wall, stretching unnaturally tall. It towered above him, arms hanging long as ropes. The soup can slipped from his hands, spilling across the floor. He pressed his back to the chair, staring. The shadow leaned closer. Then, in a voice like air sucked through teeth, he heard it whisper, "Look." Daniel's skin crawled. His head turned against his will, eyes dragged toward the far wall. There, painted in shadow, was Maya's apartment. He saw her lying on the couch, a book fallen across her chest. Above her stood a tall, dark figure, its hand raised as though poised to touch her throat. "No," Daniel gasped. He stumbled to his feet, knocking the chair over. "No, no." The vision blinked away. The wall was bare again. He ran to the door, hand on the knob, ready to burst into the hall and warn her. But his own shadow lay across the doorframe, darker than ever, as if barring his exit. Daniel froze. The shape was thick, oily, wrong. He pressed against the knob, but it didn't turn. The shadow's head tilted toward him, and slowly, so very slowly, it smiled. The shadow no longer pretended. For days it had lingered, mocked, whispered. Now it followed Daniel openly. Wherever he turned, it stretched across the wall in grotesque mimicry, its limbs bending at angles his body never made. Sometimes it split in two, one part clinging beneath him while another drifted across the ceiling like spilled ink. Daniel kept the lamps burning, every bulb glowing until the apartment hummed with static. His skin prickled constantly from the heat. Still, the darkness thickened. On the fourth night without sleep, he heard scratching. It came from the walls, slow, deliberate strokes as though long nails dragged down plaster. He pressed his ear to the surface. The sound echoed from inside, deep within the bones of the building. The shadow shifted at his feet. "Stop it," Daniel whispered. "Stop." But the scratches only grew louder. At 2 a.m., he broke. He stumbled across the hall, knocking on Maya's door with trembling fists. She opened in pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Daniel?" His face was gaunt, his lips pale. It's not me." He gasped. "My shadow. It's not me, it's something else. It's been here, it's..." Her concern hardened into alarm. "Daniel, slow down." "It's not mine." He stepped forward, desperate. "It's not." Behind her, on the wall of her apartment, he saw it. His shadow. It didn't stretch from his feet. It wasn't connected to him at all. It stood independently, a tall black shape on her plaster wall, arms spread wide. Daniel staggered back. "No, no." Maya turned, frowning. "What are you?" The shadow waved at her. She froze, her breath caught. "Oh my God," she whispered. Daniel's stomach lurched. "You see it?" Her face drained of color. "Yes." The apartment seemed to sigh. Lights flickered. Daniel's shadow swelled, spreading along her walls like ink in water. "Get out," he shouted, grabbing Maya's wrist. They stumbled into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind them. But the shadow slid under the crack, stretching black fingers across the floor. Maya screamed. Daniel yanked her toward his apartment, fumbling with the lock. They burst inside, light pouring over them. For a moment, the shadow shrank back, hissing in the corners. Maya clutched his arm. "What is that thing?" Daniel shook his head wildly. "It's been following me, weeks, maybe longer. It's not mine. It's never been mine." The lamps flickered again. Darkness rippled across the ceiling. The shadow rose higher, peeling itself from the walls. It no longer resembled him at all. Its arms were too long, its body too thin, its head featureless except for the suggestion of a mouth, wide and grinning. Maya backed toward the door. We have to get out." "No," Daniel rasped. "It follows. It always follows." The figure bent low, its hands stretching toward them. The air grew heavy, thick, as though the light itself was being swallowed. Daniel grabbed the nearest lamp and swung it, smashing the bulb across the shadow's hand. Sparks flew. The figure recoiled, shrieking like wind through broken glass. Maya covered her ears. "What do we do?" Daniel's eyes darted wildly. "It's not a shadow, it's behind me. It's always been behind me. Pretending." The realization crashed over him like cold water. Every strange lag, every delayed movement, it wasn't sluggish mimicry. It was catching up, a parasite attached to him, mimicking to stay hidden. And now it was tired of hiding. The lights began dying one by one. Bulb after bulb popped, plunging corners into darkness. The shadows swelled with each burst, grinning wider. Daniel dragged Maya to the center of the room, lamps still blazing around them. "It feeds on the dark," he whispered. "We have to. We can't let it." Another lamp popped. Darkness spread closer. The figure lunged. Daniel shoved Maya aside as black arms slammed into him, pinning him against the wall. He gasped, the air sucked from his lungs. Cold sank into his skin, a freezing void. He clawed at the blackness, fingers sliding through smoke like flesh. The shadow's head bent close, its grin splitting wider, stretching ear to ear. Maya grabbed the fallen lamp and swung it desperately. The bulb smashed against the figure's side, searing light into its form. The shadow shrieked and recoiled, loosening its grip. Daniel collapsed, coughing. "Run," but Maya shook her head. "Not without you." The shadow swelled again, blotting out half the room. Its grin rippled across the walls. Daniel staggered to his feet. "It doesn't want me alive," he rasped. "It wants me empty. It wants to take my place." The truth crystallized in his chest. Every time it lingered, every delayed echo, it wasn't following. It was learning. It was waiting for the moment it could step forward and wear him like a skin. The shadow surged. Maya screamed as black tendrils whipped toward her. Daniel threw himself in the way, the force slamming him to the floor, his body convulsed, vision blurring. In the haze, he saw himself. Not his shadow, himself. Standing in the corner, wit perfectly still, watching. His own mouth curled into a smile that wasn't his. "No," Daniel whispered. His voice was thin, weak. "No, no, no." The figure in the corner tilted its head, the grin widened. The shadow wasn't behind him anymore, it was in front. Maya pulled at his arm, desperate. "Daniel, please, we have to go." He shook his head. The weight of it pressed down on him, a realization heavy as stone. "I can't leave, not with it here." Another bulb burst. Only 2 lamps remained. Daniel forced himself to his feet, swaying. He looked at Maya, eyes raw. "When the lights are gone, it takes me. That's what it's been waiting for." She shook her head violently. There has to be another way. But Daniel was already moving. He stumbled to the circuit breaker by the door. "Daniel, don't," Maya cried. He looked back at her, hollow-eyed, trembling. "If it lives in the light, I'll take the light away." His hand slammed the switch down. The apartment plunged into darkness. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the sound began, tearing, like fabric ripped apart, like flesh splitting. The air filled with whispers, layered voices speaking in languages Daniel didn't know. Something pressed against his skin, slick and cold. Pulling. Maya screamed. She fumbled for the door, but it wouldn't open. She could only watch as blackness writhed across the room, swallowing Daniel whole. His voice rose once, strangled, then cut off. The whispers stopped, a long silence. Then slowly, the light of morning crept through the curtains. Maya opened the door at last. She found Daniel's body lying still on the floor, eyes open, mouth slack. She sobbed, dropping to her knees. But when she looked up, 2 shadows stretched across the wall. One was hers. The other stood just behind her. The police called it a heart attack. That was the only explanation that made sense for a man in his late 30s, found lifeless in his own apartment, surrounded by shattered lamps. The coroner's report noted exhaustion, malnutrition, stress, no signs of struggle. Nothing unusual. Maya didn't believe a word of it. She had been there. She had seen the dark rip itself out of the walls, had felt the air rippling with whispers that weren't human. But she couldn't tell the truth. Not to the police, not to the neighbors, not even to herself fully. It sounded insane. So she kept her silence, nodding numbly as officers carried Daniel's body away. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about the shadows. In the days that followed, she stayed in her apartment, curtains drawn tight, every light burning. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face in those final seconds, his mouth moving as though whispering to her, though no sound came out. And she remembered the wall, 2 shadows. She told herself it had been her imagination, a trick of light. Trauma did that. Stress, anything but what it had looked like. But at night, when the lamps buzzed and the air pressed heavy around her, she swore she saw movement just at the edges of her vision. Her own shadow lingering, twitching, bending in ways her body didn't. She left the apartment once, just once, to stand in Daniel's doorway. The landlord had already locked it, planning to clear it out for the next tenant. But Maya pressed her ear to the wood, heart hammering. Inside, she thought she heard a breath. 3 weeks later, she gave up and packed to leave. Boxes stacked high, her suitcase by the door. She told herself it was just grief, just nerves. A new place would mean a fresh start, a chance to sleep again. That night, on her last evening in the building, she let the lamps burn as she dozed on the couch. At 3 a.m., she woke. The room was quiet, too quiet. Her eyes drifted to the wall. Her shadow stood stretched across the plaster, tall and thin. Only, she hadn't moved. She was still lying down, but her shadow was standing upright, leaning toward the door. Her breath caught. She sat up slowly, sweat prickling her skin. The shadow tilted its head. Then it lifted one arm, slowly, lazily, and waved. Her heart lurched. She clamped her hands over her mouth, forcing back a scream. Because from the corner of the room, just behind her, another shape leaned into the light. It was Daniel. Not Daniel's body, not truly. A black silhouette, head bowed, mouth stretching into that same wide, unnatural grin. Maya stumbled backward, tripping over the couch. The figure swelled against the wall, arms spreading wide like wings. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." The lights flickered. She lunged for the breaker box. Her fingers hovered over the switch. If she turned the lights off, what would happen? Would the thing take her as it had taken him? Or was that the only way to end it? Her hand shook violently. She closed her eyes. From the darkness behind her, Daniel's voice whispered. Soft, ragged, almost gentle. It's your turn. The last lamp popped, and the room went dark. At dawn, neighbors said they saw Maya's apartment lightless, curtains fluttering in the breeze. The door was ajar. No one saw her leave. But in the pale morning sun, on the hallway wall, two shadows lingered. They didn't belong to anyone. And as the light shifted, the two shadows leaned together. Then, slowly, a third stretched out beside them. Thanks for listening. Hit the like button if you really like this story, and don't forget to subscribe.